As I said, there were no, we were not briefed on any threats, but I think it's...
So are you saying that there were no threats back when Pierre
As I
Poilievre
said,
was...
not that I was briefed on.
So we've heard from numerous national intelligence and security experts that this has been going on for over 30 years.
Well, then call a national inquiry and open the scope to more than the last 8 years.
I appreciate that, but it's...
That was Jenny Byrne, the former Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Stephen Harper and former 2011 and 2015 Conservative National Election Campaign Director. She was testifying at a parliamentary committee's probe into foreign election interference. Byrne, who's also the former senior campaign advisor for Pierre Poilievre's Tory leadership campaign, says, as you heard there, she was not briefed by intelligence officials about the possibility of foreign election interference during her time as a campaign director. Her testimony comes as La Presse reports the federal government will introduce a foreign agents registry this year. Let's bring in our front bench panel of former premiers to unpack that. Joining us this evening, former British Columbia Premier Christy Clark. She's now a senior advisor at Bennett Jones. Former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada. And former Nova Scotia Premier Darrell Dexter. He's now Vice Chair of Global Public Affairs. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. It's been a little while. Darrell, I'll start with you because in the interim, between the last time we spoke and this time, the government did decide to expel the Chinese diplomat at the outset of this week who was implicated by that CSIS intelligence in targeting Michael Chong and his family. Now they're talking about introducing a foreign agents registry. They had just begun consultations on that ever since these headlines start. Are they getting ahead of things finally or being dragged there?
Well, I think it looks like they're being dragged there. I think most Canadians would be surprised that there isn't already a foreign agents registry. There ought to be one. Ought to have been one in place. You know, any time that you're dealing with hostile actors representing foreign governments who are trying to interfere in your democracy or in the work of your government, you ought to take every opportunity, use every tool you have to ensure that that just doesn't happen, and it certainly appears, and there's lots about this that I think is confounding. For example, I don't really understand why it is that briefings from national security agencies don't include kind of a committee of cabinet who are briefed regularly. I don't think there should be any problem also providing briefings to opposition leaders. Probably not everything that you would get if you were a cabinet minister, but certainly the headlines on anything that the security agencies are picking up. I mean, this is a very serious issue. We've watched it play out in other countries, notably in the United States during their elections. We need to take it seriously, and we need to demonstrate to Canadians that it is being taken seriously.
It's interesting because, Christy, what has become quite apparent is that CSIS and spy agencies in this country who are making some of those determinations operate behind a curtain, right? We didn't really understand what bar they're judging, what information they can convey things to. But now that it all is in the political realm, is it kind of incumbent on the government to have a little bit more say in how that information gets out and to whom, and how transparent really the security apparatus is about all this stuff?
I think it's important that the government have some say. I think it's even more important that the government have some interest in it. I mean, Darrell started talking about this a little bit. It is really surprising that cabinet ministers aren't regularly briefed on security threats to our country, apparently, that the Prime Minister didn't know that MP Michael Chong's family had been threatened. And like the fact that this wasn't communicated to the government by CSIS suggests that CSIS is not accountable to anybody, or that the government doesn't really have very much interest in these issues at all. So whatever the problem is, it needs to be fixed. I do think a foreign agent registry is overdue. I mean, other countries have been doing it for a while, including, our sister countries like Australia, for some of the same reasons that we need to. And I don't understand why we aren't having yet a public inquiry. I mean, you look at Kenny Chiu, the member of parliament who says he lost his seat because of it. Michael Chong, whose family was apparently threatened. You look at the charges that have been raised against the Chinese consulate in Vancouver for interfering in a very important municipal election. And Vassy, I'll just end with this. It wasn't the government that told us about that. It was apparently people within CSIS who were leaking that information to make sure the public knew. The system is really broken.
Do you think, Brian, that, and I don't want to ascribe nefarious intent because I don't have proof of anything, but do you think in the sort of absence of more transparency or more directives from the government, it does leave people with the impression that they haven't or they aren't taking things as seriously as they should be?
Absolutely. There's no doubt, though, in this case, that it's one of those things that probably wasn't a priority. I think Daryl and Christy both talked about how this could have been done way before. I would agree with that. But it probably just wasn't a priority. All of a sudden, you have something that splashes on the front pages, figuratively and literally, and obviously it becomes a political hot potato, becomes an issue for the government. And to be fair, they moved pretty quickly since it has been an issue. I mean, they started consultations in March, and they ended those consultations. When you hear government consultations, you think that could take months and months, if not even over a year.
But should we really judge it by the speed of government? Like,
yeah, no, listen.
I don't know how many people at home think, oh, great, only 3 months? Yeah.
I agree, but I think it demonstrates that the federal government understood that this was now a priority because it was brought right to the floor of Parliament because I think Canadians were upset, and I think we saw from all parties and people outside of the Liberal caucus that were Liberals say that they didn't like it either, that MP Chung wasn't briefed, and to hear that potentially there were others. So I think because of that, the government tried to act as quickly as possible. But look, it's one of those things over the last few months. It definitely feels like the government is kind of always behind, always reacting. In this case, the registry is sort of a no-brainer. It's going to bring transparency. It's something that we have our Five Eyes partners. Many of them have it already. We can learn from them, see what worked well, what didn't work so well. So the implementation can go pretty smoothly, I hope, for the federal government. So it's a no-brainer. And I think because of that, they did try to go a little quicker since this has become an issue. I also think that they should keep going further with some of the actions they're taking in response to this. And I said it Tuesday, I'll say it again tonight. I think they should definitely give the directive that there be more briefings when elected officials are involved. And that's not just federally, provincially, municipally, to the people that are impacted if and when they can do that. And of course, that they sort of monitor, because all of those levels of government are very important, and of course the families and the elected officials themselves, it's important that they be safe.
Okay, I'm going to
Vassy,
leave
can I
this
just
part of
add
our
this
discussion.
quickly?
Oh, yeah, you go ahead quickly. You go for it, Christy.
Which is to say, they did move quickly once it became a public issue, but not once it became an issue, and that's the problem. They should have. I mean, there is nothing more sacrosanct than our democracy, and there is no bigger problem than having it being interfered with. The fact that they weren't dealing with it until it became public, I think, is really something that should be addressed again by a public inquiry.